So it has come to my attention that Michael Perry is recording a story a day on his Facebook page. Well, if you don't know Michael Perry, you should, because by my way of thinking, he is the high bar. He is the writer to whom I aspire. He is both prolific and poetic. Well, I'm not going to record one of these every day. I don't have that many good stories. But I have one now, and it's about faith, and I'd like to share it with you. Now, when I first started writing, people were generally kind. As a matter of fact, they were kinder than I thought they should have been. There were reports of people reading the stories to their kids as they went to bed. There were stories about people reading this from my book to their parents on their deathbed. That's gratifying. But I always knew that it was not the whole story. Then, thankfully, came a woman named Sarah Keagan, to whom I will forever be grateful. Sarah hit me right between the eyes. She said, "This book is a colossal disappointment. I couldn't even make it halfway through. The author doesn't tell animal stories, and when he does, never with the self-deprecating humor of James Herriot. It is an overtly Christian dictum that feels as if I'm being stuck in a conversation with somebody stuck in the good old days." Ouch. Well, there's a tremendous amount of validity in that criticism. However, there is one point that I will take exception to, and that is an overtly Christian dictum. You see, I'm a person of faith. That's a perspective from which I write. But I have friends who were Christians, agnostics, Buddhists, people who have no particular faith at all. But by my way of thinking, if you're good folks and treat people well, then you're fine with me. So here's my story about Sallie. In 25 years of veterinary medicine, I have come by the notion that animals have a tendency to evolve in the likeness of their families. Becky and Don Wilson had a little cocker spaniel named Sallie. Sallie had the requisite droopy eyes, goopy ears, and a grade 3 heart murmur, but she also had the disposition of a nanny. She'd meet the boys at the bus, play ball, and walk down to the lake without a leash when the boys went fishing. She sat on command and never jumped up, but her claim to fame was that she never barked. Not once. The Wilsons' appointments at the veterinary clinic were always at 3:40 in the afternoon, right after Becky picked the boys up from school. I'd scoop Sallie onto the table and do my physical exam. Becky and the boys would sit on the wooden bench. They'd raise their hand if they had a question. "Mr. Vet Guy, is Sallie going to die?" I assured them Sallie was in great health and we wanted to keep her that way. Aaron would ask if he could feed Sallie some freeze-dried liver while I gave her vaccines. We have a lending library at our clinic, and I sent the Wilsons home with a copy of James Herriot's collection of children's stories, and I advised Becky to get a box of Kleenex. Becky was a teller at the bank and the perpetual homeroom mother, den mother, and chaperone for every field trip. Don was a maintenance man at Melster Chocolate Factory. He had a voltmeter, a drain auger, and a ladder rack, and he knew how to use them. He worked for $20 cash or barter. Proving that class has no dollar sign, their home would make Sanford and Son look like the Biltmore Hotel, sided with chartreuse clapboard, Tyvek, and tin, surrounded by wheelbarrows with no wheels, and mowers robbed of fuel tanks and carburetors. The first sign. The first sign was when Don started to drive Becky to Sallie's veterinary appointments. Then there was the faded red bandana as the flesh slowly melted and the color faded from her cheeks. Still, she'd conjure up a smile and ask, "How you doing, Bill? How are your kids?" when I stopped to make a deposit at Farmers and Merchants Bank. She never missed the boys' football games, but she was huddled under a mountain of blankets shivering at the season opener in September. Mother Teresa said, "Blessed are the sick," and she had Becky in mind. As she no longer could, Becky taught the boys to cook, clean, and do laundry. She also let them see her and Don cry and talk frankly about the future. What she would not allow was a late assignment, poor grades, or a missed practice just because Mom was sick. Michael Perry said, "The real pain starts when the last casserole dish is returned." For me, it was at Becky's wake. looking past as I shook hands with Don and the boys to see Sallie laying next to the chair where she and Becky would watch the lake through the window. Now, I would like to think that we do our best for every patient and client, but there are times when you dig just a little bit deeper. The UW and Mayo did their best to save Becky, and we were going to ensure the boys had Sallie for every possible day. We aspirated every new lump. We extracted every abscessed tooth. We managed her congestive heart disease with top-shelf drugs. Protocol and price sheets were out the window. Don never saw an invoice. Instead, he swapped out ballasts in our fluorescent fixtures and painted exam rooms on weekends. We were hell-bent to preserve Becky's legacy through Sallie, but we would not let that dog suffer, not for a day. Finally, Don brought her in late on a Friday night. They'd hand-fed her a little hamburger, but she hadn't even been able to stand or pick up her head for 5 days. Don spoke because I could not. He said, "Bill, it's time." I turned to get the drugs when he stopped. I want her to spend one last night with the boys. I said, "Don, I understand, but I honestly don't think this dog is going to live until the morning." Don had lost his wife. He understood. Well, she did make it through the night. I met the boys at the clinic at 6 o'clock the next morning. We shook hands, hugged, and said goodbye. That fall, Don was standing up against the fence at Brett's last football game. I'd been there 5 or 10 minutes when finally, still staring at the field, he said, "Bill, did I ever tell you about Sallie's last night?" He had not. He said, "I woke up at 2:30 in the morning. I tried to stand but fell down dizzy, drunk, and vomited all over the floor. When I crawled into the kitchen, Brett came out of the boys' room, staggering with Aaron over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. The house was filled with carbon monoxide. The pilot light had burned out." The Wilsons did not have a carbon monoxide detector or a fire detector. They had Sallie. Sallie was standing, staring at the stove, barking, braying, and howling like a blue-tick hound with a coon up a tree. Now, you can call it God, Buddha, Allah, Abba. You can call it Pistol Pete Maravich. By my way of thinking, this would not have happened with an element of divine intervention, or maybe Becky looking out for her flock for one last time. Keep things moving forward.